Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternities, a perfect episode number 6, Ozymandias Breaking Bad. This video is a series of videos where I name 10 episodes that I think are near perfect from some of my favorite shows, and I do a deep dive analysis on each of these episodes, which I believe is a near perfect episode. Now, usual disclaimers, not necessarily my favorite episodes of all time, and I'm not presenting them in any particular order, but they are episodes that I think are great and that should be celebrated more and that I would like to take a deeper look into. If you'd like to check out the rest of my perfect episode series or what I have so far, you can check that out in the link in the description below to the playlist of the videos I've done so far. This video is going to examine Season 5, Episode 14 of Breaking Bad, an episode called Ozymandias. Now, this episode is, I believe Vince Gilligan, the showrunner, creator himself, said this was his favorite episode of the show. Many other people have noted that this being the best episode of the show. I completely agree with them. I personally named this one of the best episodes of the show, or the best episode of the show. I often talk about how Breaking Bad has the best series finale of all time, which I think it might have just been supplanted by The Expanse, but that's another topic for another time. But still, not many shows end on a high note. Ending a show is actually a very hard thing to do, and most shows fumble. Breaking Bad is one of the best examples of them getting the ending just right. Now, as much as I do love the series finale of Breaking Bad, which I believe is called Felina, I think it was a great way to end the show, and I do think is one of the best finales of all time, if not the best. Or maybe tied for the best. But it's not as good as this episode here, Ozymandias, which was the third to last episode of the show. There are 2 more episodes after this episode, but this is really when everything comes crashing down. Breaking Bad has always been a show about Walter White and his downfall and his character flaws, and the whole show has been a deep dive analysis on how he let his pride get the better of him, and he slowly starts to fall apart and turn into a very corrupt gangster. And this happens slowly over the course of 5 seasons. And you could say that this episode is the accumulation of that. This is when, because earlier in Season 5, I would say the halfway point in Season 5, he achieved his goal, becoming successful, badass gangster. He has barrels and barrels of money. But this is the episode when that all crashes down. When reality catches up to him, when his downfall, which is inevitable, everyone knew was inevitable, happens. Now, the finale, Felina, cements his downfall, and is, when he actually physically dies. But this is when he fell from the ladder. This is when he fell from the clouds. This is when his whole world came crashing down. And it was one of the best portrayals of this type of downfall I've ever seen. And part of what makes it so good is that it's so well earned through a slow burn through the course of 5 seasons. Building all these characters involved, building the situations where you're invested in all of the characters to see them completely at their lowest and to see everything fall apart for everyone. Quite heartbreaking. And this has some of the best acting, some of the best cinematography, some of the best writing I've seen in any show. And I think it is one of the best episodes ever made. And so, let's go ahead and dive into this episode. Now, a little background before I get to this episode. This Season 5 was ending on a story arc where Hank was trying to take down his brother Walter, brother-in-law, I should say, because he found out that he was in fact the drug pen that he'd been searching for years, Heisenberg. And so he enlisted the help of Jesse Pinkman. Now Jesse Pinkman learned that Walter was involved in trying to kill a young boy that Jesse Pinkman was fond of and was looking after. And so he got very vicious towards Walter and ended up working with Hank in order to take him down. And Walter didn't know that Jesse was working with Hank. He just knew that Jesse hated him and wanted him dead and wasn't going to work with him. So Walt hired these white supremacists who own a meth gang, and they have a lot of ties to prison. He's worked with them before, and so he hires them to kill Jesse Pinkman, because he realized that even though he cares about Jesse, he realized that Jesse is just trying to take him down and is a threat. In fact, it was Skyler's advice that he kill Jesse, and he was very opposed to it at first, but eventually they wore him down. And so it looked like Jesse had found where all his barrels and barrels of money were buried out in the middle of the desert, in the same Indian reservation where they first started cooking. And so Walt goes out there desperately trying to stop Jesse from burning the money, and he tells the white supremacist gang where to find him, where to find Jesse, and so they come out to kill Jesse as well. However, when Walt arrives, he discovers that Jesse actually isn't there with the money, that it was a hoax, a trap that Hank had set up, because Walt had no idea Jesse was working with Hank, and that they actually didn't know where the money is, and they followed Walt out to where he was going, to where the money was at. And now they had the evidence to arrest him, and Hank placed him under arrest. He called Marie, his wife, and told her that he has Walt under arrest, and so she was relieved that it's all over. But then, of course, the white supremacist gang shows up, and Walt, when he saw Hank there, he told the white supremacist gang not to show up, because he knew it would be no good with Hank was there. But they showed up anyway, and they started, Walt tried to tell them not to be involved, just to go away, but they weren't buying it, and they set up a blockade and started shooting at Hank and his partner Gomez, who they greatly outnumber. And that's where the episode ended. In the middle of the shootout, which I must admit was kind of an annoying place to end an episode, especially when I was watching it week to week. It seemed like they ended it right in the middle of the action. But then, that's where this episode picks up. So let's go ahead and get into this episode, Ozymandias. Alright, so we start with the opening scene, which is a flashback back to the time, takes place during the time of the very first episode, of the pilot episode. Of course, they're out in the same Indian reservation that they're at in present time, but of course this is when they were first started cooking, Walt and Jesse together in the RV. It shows Walt it shows the kind of dynamic that they used to have, how Walt was like preaching to him like a science teacher, and Jesse's just being like, oh, you bore me to tears, and they had this sort of adversarial relationship where Jesse puts a cigarette in his mouth and Walt's like, no, not in here, and he says, duh, like I'm an idiot, and Walt's just like, yeah, like you're an idiot. And then Jesse's like, dick. So it's kind of showing the kind of rough relationship they had, and then Walt doesn't have his pants on. Jesse makes a big deal out of it, but then Walt goes out to call his wife Skyler and try to make up some BS excuse about how the car wash manager is keeping him, and he's like, you see him rehearsing this, but once he calls her, she doesn't even care and doesn't even let him finish. It's like, yeah, sure, whatever, you'd be late, whatever, and doesn't even look into it. Also, showing the kind of relationship that they used to have as well. And then after he hangs up the phone and he talks about spending quality family time this weekend, and she says it would be really good. So it shows that they used to have a much more caring, loving relationship before the whole drug dealing thing ruined everything. So it's a interesting introspective in that way. And then he hangs up the phone, and then the Walt kind of just vanishes, and then the RV in the background vanishes, and then we cut to the opening credits. So, I think I've had differences of opinion with people on this scene over the years, because I don't think it's a bad scene. I do see what they were going for, like juxtaposing present day, the clusterfuck that we're about to experience in this episode, with how simpler things were back before Walt went down the rabbit hole, so to speak. But that being said, I still find that the scene is actually kind of unnecessary. And I do think it's poorly placed because, as I said, the last episode before this ended like right in the middle of a big action sequence. So when you tune this in, for this episode, you want to see the conclusion of that action sequence. So the whole time, this is just kind of like, get on with it. Like, I don't really need to see this flashback. I want to know what the fuck happened to the people who were shooting at Hank and Gomez. And even on a rewatch, I find I still have that kind of attitude. So I do think this scene was poorly placed. It is kind of just there to stretch out the moment. You don't get to find out what happens yet, which I don't actually think is that good of a device for storytelling. But as I said, I don't think it's a terrible scene. Like, it is interesting juxtaposing how they used to be with how they are now, and seeing the kind of relationship that Walt used to have with Jesse, and the kind of relationship he used to have with Skyler before his greed and his pride ruined everything for him. And now we're going to see how much it's ruined everything for him. But so I don't think it's terrible. I just don't think it's entirely necessary either. And maybe this episode would have been better without it. Just my humble opinion. So when we come back from the opening credits, we do go to present time, where the shoot-off has just finished, and we see that Hank's partner, Gomi, is dead. Right off the back, Hank has been shot in the leg, and he's hiding behind a car, trying to regain his senses, and he sees a rifle on the ground. He goes out to grab it, but Jack, the leader of the white supremacist group, gets there first, stops him from getting the rifle, and points a gun at Hank, and says one of his partners finds the badge of that says he's a DEA agent, and so Jack announces that he has to kill him, and then Walt freaks out and keeps yelling at him not to do it. He's handcuffed and trapped in a car, and Jack signals for one of his men, Todd, which is his nephew, to get Walt out of the car, and Walt begs Jack not to kill him, saying that Hank is actually his brother-in-law and that they're family, and Jack isn't very pleased that he had a brother-in-law who was in the DEA and didn't tell him about it, and says that there's no scenario in which this guy doesn't die. And goes to shoot him again, but Walt again yells at Jack, pleading with him, saying that he has money out there. He has $80 million he'd be willing to give Jack if he doesn't kill Hank, but Jack pronounces that that money wouldn't be worth anything to him from a jail cell. Now, Walt then pleads with Hank to try to get Hank to make a deal with Jack that he won't tell him anything, that he won't report him to the DEA, and won't tell on Jack and let him go. But Hank just looks at Walt and says, "You're the smartest man I know, and you're too stupid to realize he made up his mind 10 minutes ago." He then looks at Jack and says, "Do what you gotta do," but before he finishes his sentence, Jack kills him. So yeah, so this is a very powerful way to just start off the episode, and it does have to do with the fact that the episode ended kind of in the middle of the action, the episode before this, that is. And so this episode begins with Gomez, like a character who we've known and who we've connected to, not a main character, but someone we've seen throughout Breaking Bad. He's been, I think he was introduced in season 1. And he was like kind of this smart aleck character and someone we come to care about. And he's just dead at the start of the episode, just dead. Which at first it was like, wow. And then, of course, it leads right into, and like in the first 5 minutes of the episode, leads right into the death of Hank. Very important, very key character throughout all of Breaking Bad, someone who Walt actually does really care about, as we've seen in the scene, that Walt is very desperate for him not to kill Hank, pleading, but it's kind of too late. And we see why. This is really why Walt asked Jack not to come, because and Jack says to Walt, "Oh, it looks like we did you a solid." Because, of course, Walt was about to be arrested, but Walt would rather be arrested than Hank get killed. But it's kind of too late. And it was a very interesting line hearing Hank say, "You're the smartest man I know, but you're too stupid to realize that he made up his mind 10 minutes." Like, that was such a good line, such a powerful line. And, of course, also, I'm admitting the line where Hank says to Jack directly, "My name is Asac Schrader, and you can go fuck yourself," which is a classic sort of Hank line. Now, there's been videos arguing that Hank was the real hero of Breaking Bad, but I've done my own videos where I fought back against this because Hank became obsessed with capturing Heisenberg and then capturing Walter White, and once he realized who Heisenberg was, and he's done some pretty nasty things in the name of that. So I don't think he was a great person or a hero, because he became more about an obsession rather than doing good for the community or whatever. So I would be hesitant to call Hank a hero. He was actually a very flawed man, but of course, he was not wrong to try to bring down a drug dealer, and to see his death here was very tragic indeed, especially to see how it affects Walt. Now, what's also interesting is the fact that Jack kills Hank mid-sentence, and how this is mirrored in the finale just 2 episodes later, where Walt gets his revenge on Jack and kills Jack, and he also kills Jack mid-sentence because Jack is trying to tell him where the money is, saying, "You can't kill me until I tell you where the money is." But before he even finishes his sentence, Walt kills him because he doesn't care about the money. So that was more about the finale, but that was kind of a nice symmetry to that. But yes, an extremely powerful way to start the episode. So after Hank dies, Walt collapses to the ground in absolute anguish, and this is an absolute amazing performance by Bryan Cranston. Of course, it won't be the last one in this episode, but it shows the grief and the anguish that Walt is feeling, how he can't believe things led to this, and Hank's death is pretty much a huge end all for him, and his life has changed going forward, and there's now no denying it. Meanwhile, Jack is just preoccupied about the fact that Walt sent him specific coordinates rather than your typical directions of turn left on I-40 or whatnot. And so they track down the coordinates, and they find Walt's barrels full of money. He has 6, I believe, oil barrels just packed full of money. Must be millions, perhaps even billions of dollars. And Jack, of course, is beside himself because him and his gang intend to take the money. However, while his gang is happily, gleefully digging up the money, he can tell that his nephew Todd is looking a bit sad at Walt, and so he realizes for Todd's sake that he can't just kill Walt. But of course he does intend to take his money, but he decides to give one of the barrels to Walt, and his men protest, saying there must be like $11 million in it, and he's like, oh, what's with all the greed? And he says that to Todd specifically, so it does show he's specifically playing to Todd and wanting, because Todd respects Walt and wouldn't want it to end the other way. So Jack goes to Walt and say, hey, let's make a specific deal. My nephew likes you, so I'm going to let you live, and I'm going to let you walk out of here with a barrel full of money, and no hard feelings, and let's bygones be bygones. And Walt is just, he's not speaking, he's transfixed on something. He's just staring at something. And I followed this scene back a bit when we see Walt is on the ground completely beside himself in grief while, Jack's men are like gleefully stealing his money. He's just completely beside himself. But when he opens his eyes, when he's on the ground, he sees something. And when he stands up, he's still transfixed on that something. And even when Jack is talking to him, he's not really listening. He's just looking at that something. And finally Jack is like, look, I have to know we're square, otherwise we're going to have to go that other way. And so Walt realizes his life isn't about, so he shakes Jack's hand. But he then says the one word which reveals to us, the audience, what it was Walt has been staring at the whole time. He says, Pinkman. And then tells Jack that you still owe him for Pinkman because, Walt hired Jack to kill Jesse Pinkman. And Jack's just like, all right, well, if you find him, we'll kill him. And he, without staring, like he never broke eye contact, he was transfixed and staring the whole time, he says, found him. And then the camera goes over and we see that it is in fact Jesse hiding under one of the other cars that Walt must have saw when he was on the ground. And so Jack's men drag Jesse out from under the car, kicking and screaming, and Jack prepares to shoot Jesse in the back of the head, and he looks at Walt asking for approval or to give the word to kill him, and Walt nods his head yes. Now this is a very important moment because Jesse and Walt has had a very struggled relationship throughout the course of the show. Not always the most healthy relationship. But in the long run, throughout most of the series, I do believe that Walt cared about Jesse. I think this was made clear specifically in several episodes before this when everyone was advising Walt to kill Jesse, yet he was refusing to do so, saying that because he thought of Jesse as another son, as another protege, someone that he actually cared for and loved. So one must get in Walt's mindset why he wants him dead so much, because at first he was reluctantly or had Jack's men to kill him because he was worried that Jesse would try to harm him or his family. But now he's not reluctant. He seems like he's relishing. He's like full of hatred when he says the word Pinkman to Jack. And Jesse would have gotten away if Walt hadn't pointed out. So Walt's going out of his way to make sure that Jesse is killed. And he even, of course, gives the nod of yes, execute him. So it does make you wonder why Walt suddenly has this hatred and venom towards Jesse, and it's definitely has something to do with Hank's death. But I think overall, Walt is blaming Jesse everything on Jesse because Walt's money is getting stolen, like 5-6 of it, or the majority of it, is getting stolen, and there's nothing he can do about it. That's his life work. That's what he was building to. His empire is basically falling apart around him. And of course, Hank, someone who he does care about and love, was just killed right in front of his eyes. And so he knows that his world is different now, and nothing's ever going to be the same. His world just fell apart. And I think he's putting all of that blame on Jesse. Because because Walt was trying in previous episodes, Walt was generally trying to reach out to Jesse and help him, but Jesse didn't trust Walt and thought that he was trying to trick him, but he wasn't. He actually wanted to just give him handfuls of money and send him on his merry way, but Jesse had that revelation about what he did to Brock, and so Jesse was also filled with hatred about Walt, and it was all about getting back at Walt, and he really wanted to take Walt down, which is why he was working with Hank to do so. And so I think Walt sort of feels betrayed by Jesse because he feels like he had nothing but care and love for Jesse, and Jesse was just trying to destroy him. And this is what I think is going through Walt's mind right now, is because of Jesse's interference, because he led Hank out to the money, because he helped Hank trick him, which led to Hank's death, and the white supremacists stealing all of Walt's money. Walt is more angry at Jesse in this moment than he is at Jack. That's really what I believe. That he had transferred all of the anguish and hate of what he's experienced in the moment to Jesse and blames him for everything, because if Jesse would have just let him help him like he wanted to and just took the money that Walt was offering, everything would be fine. But because Jesse refused to help and was actively trying to hurt Walt and take him down, all of this happens. And I believe that's what Walt is thinking of right in this moment. But Jesse isn't killed because Todd speaks up and halts the execution and points out to Jack that Jesse was working with the DEA, so he might have told them some things about them that they should probably know before they kill him. And so he suggests they take Jesse back and interrogate him first before they execute him. And Jack even asks Walt if this is okay, which he doesn't have to, but he's showing chivalry to try to show respect because his nephew respects him. And Walt nods, and Walt seems to think, he seems to be okay with this because they're basically going to go torture Jesse before they kill him, so it's even a worse fate for Jesse. And Jesse, of course, is screaming in agony and being dragged away. But Walt tells him to wait a second. And he goes up to Jesse and he reveals that he was there when a woman he loved, Jane, died of an overdose. And that he could have saved her. And he specifically chose not to. And just let her die, which is, of course, to happen at the end of season 2, and it is a huge secret that Walt has been holding on to. But now he finally reveals this secret to Jesse right before he believes Jesse is going to be executed. And I do believe this was that Walt was in so much pain and agony at the moment, and he was directing it all towards Jesse and blaming Jesse entirely for everything that just happened. So he just wanted Jesse to feel the most pain possible. I believe this is why he finally confessed, because he realized that it would make him feel even worse. And maybe it was just a big way, it was just a really dark, twisted way of him saying fuck you to Jesse right before he's gone off to get executed. Now, we do know from the following episodes they don't actually kill Jesse. They keep him around to cook for them, but they torture him the whole time, so it's almost a fate worse than death, and they kill someone he loves in order to manipulate him to keep cooking for them. But eventually, of course, if you see the movie El Camino, Jesse does get a happy ending eventually, but he has to suffer through quite a bit of hell before getting to that point, so one could argue that a quick death might have been a better option for him at this stage. And Walt, and I talked about this when I covered the whole season 5, when I talked about the finale, because in the finale, I do believe Walt does save Jesse's life and does care about Jesse. And I talked about it then because he had several months in exile to think about it and to think of what he's done and to realize that he had wronged Jesse and realize that he fucked up Jesse's life and realize that he does in fact care about Jesse. So I think he eventually changed his mind with months to think about it. But in this moment, he's not thinking rationally. He's just completely overcome by grief and anguish and is just directing that all towards Jesse. And this is something I think he does regret by the time we get to the finale, which is why he actually sacrifices himself to save Jesse in the finale. But in this moment, yeah, he has just so much hatred and disdain towards Jesse. And it really comes off in this scene that is like so powerful. So after Jack and gang leave, Walt goes to drive home. We see him looking wistfully at the graves of Hank and Gomez, really regretting and feeling the pain of what just happened. But, of course, it's not a very good day for Walt because as he drives home, he runs out of gas because one of the bullets punctured the gas tank. And so we see him walking through the desert, rolling the barrel of money around. And as implied, he's been walking for a very, very long time. They play this really soft, like old Western type music, and I really love these sort of, I wouldn't call it a montage, but these musical things that Breaking Bad does, because it has a very sort of somber, like it's a juxtaposition of like this cheerful sort of somber music to like Walt having the worst day of his life, having to roll his barrel around in the middle of the desert. But eventually he comes across someone in the house who has a truck, and at first he insists the truck isn't for sale. Then Walt waves a big stack of cash around and he gets the truck. So it's maybe a little humorous, just a little bit of a release in this really heavy episode. But next we get some of the heavy stuff when Marie shows up at the car wash where Skyler and Flint are, and of course Flint, or Walt Jr., is very like oblivious to what's going on, but of course there's been a feud between Skyler and Marie due to her husbands. However, Marie takes Skyler in the room and reveals that Hank has arrested Walt and has him dead to rights, and that's it. It's over, because of course Marie is going off the phone call that Hank made to her in the previous episode. Of course she's unaware that Hank's actually dead and what transpired between Walt, but as far as she knows, Walt has been arrested, and she reveals this to Skyler and makes it clear that I can possibly forgive you going forward, but you need to sort of toe the line. And Skyler, of course, is beside herself. Again, amazing acting in this episode all along. She does an amazing job of just, without even dialogue, just showing how devastated, like the heavy breathing, that her whole world is crushing in because everything that she thought she knew is coming to an end. And then Marie tells Skyler that she has to tell her son, Walt Jr., Flint, of what really happened and what his father was actually doing. And of course she's like, no, I can't do it, he can't possibly know. But Marie tries to make her see reason, because, well, as far as she knows, Walt's going to get arrested and everyone's going to know what Walt did. And so he's going to find out, Flint's going to find out eventually, and Marie just thinks it would be better if it was coming from his mother rather than some random uniformed policeman. So they take Flint in, and he, of course, is in extreme denial. Again, amazing acting in Walt Jr.'s behalf is how he portrays like his whole world is now crashing down, that he can't believe what they're actually saying to him. And of course he keeps saying that you're lying, you're full of shit. But both Skyler and Marie had to reassure him that they are telling the truth. Your father's a drug dealer, one of the biggest drug dealers there's been, and he's been arrested by your uncle. And so he says he wants to talk to Uncle Hank, and Marie says, "Oh, he can't talk right now. He's in processing." Of course, not realizing that he's dead. And then so Marie just tells Flint to breathe, to try to breathe and calm down, and he's devastated. And what do you mean, try to breathe? And just walks out. And then Marie suggests to Skyler that she take him home, and they just just go home and relax, and that she'll be by later when they have more information. It's pretty powerful stuff. Again, this is like the whole episode is accumulation of the whole entire show, really, and this is something we've been waiting like 5 seasons to see if Walt Jr. would ever find out what his father actually did, and here we get it. We get the scene, and it does have that weight of the accumulation of all this time of him not knowing, of him finally finding out. And the actors again do an amazing job of powerhousing. And I do love the cinematography too in this scene, even though it's very subtle, because a lot of it, particularly the scene with Marie talking to Skyler, because a lot of it focuses on Skyler while Marie is talking, and just to see her reaction, I think it's brilliant, like everything in this episode. So we see Skyler driving Walt Jr. home, and he is just beside himself. He doesn't have his seatbelt on, and so the car keeps beeping, and Skyler asks him to put his seatbelt on. He just says, "Are you fucking serious right now?" Because he's just, again, his whole life has just been shattered. He's just in shock about everything. And he tells her that if she knew about this the whole time and didn't say anything, then she's just as bad as he is. But when they arrive home, they are shocked to find that weird truck in the driveway. And of course, this is the truck that Walt had bought off the Native American. And they go in the house and find Walt in a panic, packing all of his clothes. And he tells them that they need to pack and they need to leave right now. But they're not moving. They're just in shock. And Skyler's like, "What are you doing here? Where's Hank? Hank had you arrested." And I don't think Walt knew that they knew that. But of course, when he finds that out, he tries to make up a lie. And now, again, I know I sound like a broken record. I keep repeating myself whenever I give it, but it's amazing acting throughout this whole episode, and the way that Walt is, you can tell he's trying to put on the front for his family, but you can tell like that he's just in shambles, that his whole life is shattered, and you can hear the panic in his voice, and he tries to measly come up with a BS excuse as to how he would have gotten away from Hank, and he says, "Oh, I negotiated," and of course Skyler interrupts him like, "You negotiated?" Like, it's very obvious that he's lying and trying to make something up, and she can tell that, so he just drops it and just reasserts back to we need to go, we need to leave right now, pack your things, and let's get out of here. And I love this scene because they both are not responding to the other. Like, they're stuck on the thing. For Skyler, she's stuck on, "Where's Hank? What happened to Hank?" And Walt is stuck on, "We need to get out of here. We need to leave." And neither one is addressing the other. So, like, for example, when she asks, "Where's Hank?" Walt responds by getting really close to Skyler and trying to, sound soft and genuine and be like, "Look, I got $11 million in the truck. We just need to leave. We can start a new life. We can have a new life together, a brand new life. We got millions of dollars, but we have to leave right now." So that doesn't address Skyler's question at all. He's skirting around the question. He's not addressing it. And Skyler is not addressing Walt's desire to leave because she's stuck on the fact that, "Where's Hank?" And so after he says this to her, she responds by saying, "You killed him." And it's really well written, not just well acted, but also well written dialogue, because they're sort of skirting around each other, but she gathers the information that she needs from the response. And his reaction was genuine anguish and denial, because he didn't kill Hank, to be fair, but he's just like, in the pain, look of pain on his face when she accuses him of this is genuine. And then she reasserts even louder, "You killed Hank." And then Walt Jr., of course, hears this and it's like, "What?" And he denies it. He says, no, I didn't kill him. I tried to save him." And he says it with like such vigor that but he lets it slip, because he kind of lets it slip that Hank died, and he actually addresses Skyler's concerns about Hank, which he was trying to avoid. He was trying to skirt around. He was trying to change the subject, but he realized that it wouldn't go. And of course, it was more of a defensive measure, an act of sort of instinct to just yell out, "I tried to save him." But of course, that doesn't alleviate Skyler's concerns. It just makes him even more concerned. And Skyler just sits there in shock. She's frozen. She can't move. Meanwhile, Walt goes back to pack the things, and Walt Jr. tries to get more information about Hank out of him. But of course, Walt has defaulted into his change the subject at all costs mode, just talk about how they need to leave the lake. And he tries to sound father is like, "Look, son, we just have to pack our things. We have to go, blah, blah, blah." Meanwhile, Skyler is she's still frozen. When she comes out of it, this is one of my favorite pieces of cinematography from anything ever. I think there's other examples of this in classic movies, which I was shown in film school and whatnot, but this is like the best kind of modern example. And it's something I appreciate it because I noticed it myself, although it is quite noticeable. So the shot has, in the foreground, it has a knife holder of those really sharp kitchen knives sitting on like a kitchen counter, and next to the knives is the phone. And so we see that's in the foreground. In the background, we see Skyler looking at this, and how she approaches it, and she stands there. When she gets there, she just stands there looking at them. And in the meanwhile, the shot has both of these items in the foreground, so it's focused on it. So I think it's a brilliant storytelling. It's a brilliant visual way of really building suspense and bringing the options. So basically what the shot is telling the audience is that she has two options here. She can either pick up the phone and call the police, or she can pick up a knife and try to fend Walt off herself. And that she's stuck between these two options, and you kind of don't know which way she's going to go, and it does a great job of sort of begging that question, which way she's going to go. And I think the natural choice, the thing at least I was thinking of when I first saw this, and I'm sure most people were thinking of, the natural choice would be for her to pick up the phone and call the police. And so it's kind of a shock, like a thrill, when she actually picks up the knife instead. And she picks up the knife, and when Walt is walking back into the main room and Walt Jr.'s behind him, she gets in Walt Jr.'s way, sort of holds him back like she's protecting him, and then wields the knife at Walt. Now, Walt doesn't back down, and he thinks that she's just acting crazy, and so he actually tries to reach out to her, and she actually does it. This is how afraid, how much fear is driving her in this moment. She actually swipes at Walt with the knife and cuts his hand, and Walt loses his shit because he's enraged, because from his perspective he's just trying to save his family, and why is she behaving this way, and he can't see her perspective, where this is a criminal murderer that probably just murdered my sister's husband. And and he's a terrible person that needs to get out right now. And so a fight ensues between the two of them, and it's super intense, where they're struggling over the knife, and the whole time Walt Jr. is just yelling at both of them to stop because he can't believe what's happening, and he's just frantic, yelling at them to stop. But eventually Walt gets the better of Skylar and gets on top of her, but Walt Jr. actually tackles him to the ground, which was amazing. So it does show where sort of Walt Jr.'s mindset is. He's more siding with his mother, and he sees like the terrible person his father has become. And Walt stands up and backs up and yells at them, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Because again, in his mind, he's just trying to save his family. But then Walt Jr. gets out his phone and actually calls the police. And again, amazing. This is one of the most intense, suspenseful scenes I think ever in anything ever. And to see the look on Walt's face as he hears his son call the police and say, "My father's dangerous. He just attacked my mother with a knife," which isn't necessarily actually accurate. She actually attacked him first, but still he's making it clear that he is and Walt Jr. even says to the police, "I think he killed someone," and he's still in the house. And as soon as Walt hears him say he's still in the house, he drops the knife and he's shocked. And then so he goes to leave, which was Walt Jr.'s desired effect. But in the process, he goes over and picks up their daughter, their baby girl, Molly, and steals her and kidnaps her away. And of course, when Walt Jr. sees this, he's like, "No!" And then Skylar loses it and screams at him runs after him, tries to get her back, screaming, "No, don't take her!" And by this point, Walt is in the truck and has locked the doors and is driving away with the baby, and Skylar's banging on the doors, screaming at Walt. Again, one of the most intense scenes I've seen. And of course, Skylar's car is behind the truck that Walt is driving, so Walt just backs up to it, rams it out of the driveway, out of his way, and drives away, and Skylar runs down the road screaming. I think this was like when I believe her name Anna Gunn, who plays Skylar, won an Emmy for Best Actor or Best Actress for this role, and I believe this is the scene they played at the Emmys to showcase her acting abilities. And yeah, I can definitely. I mean, I think the Emmys are bullshit. Don't get me wrong, but that was a case where they were completely accurate. It is one of the best acting pieces. Like everyone was in this whole scene in particular. I know that whole episode is full of amazing acting, but this whole scene has got to be one of the best acted scenes I've ever seen. Now, from Walt's perspective, of course, he again is sort of in the shock in the moment, and he wanted to save his family. He thought, okay, Hank's dead, my money's stolen, everything's falling apart, but at least I still have his family. At least I still have my family, is what he's telling himself, but he doesn't. And so this is more of another knife to the heart for him, that his family has, from his perspective, turned on him, when really he can't see that he's the problem, that he is the issue. Of course, he can't see that from his perspective, so he takes the baby because for him that's trying to hold on to the one last part of the family. Like if his wife and his son won't come with him, well, at least he can still have his daughter. So that's his, like, trying to desperately hold on to something that he can have, just desperately trying to save a piece of his family if he can't have the whole thing at least. And again, it's a very impulsive, in the moment action, something of course we'll see shortly that he changes his mind on and regrets, but it's like in the moment he's just so overcome by fear and guilt and wanting something to hold on to that he steals the baby away. And Skylar's reaction, of course, heartbreaking. It's just an amazing scene. So next we see Walt in the public bathroom changing Holly's diapers, and he tries to be a loving father, and she just cries and calls for her mother. And again, this is why I think Walt kind of he's starting to realize after the heat of the moment he was stole the baby to try to hold on to his family, but this is after he had time to calm down, time to think, and I think he realized that this isn't going to work, that it's not the right thing to do, and I think he makes that decision there. So then we see him call Skylar. Now this phone call, I have to say, particularly on Bryan Cranston's part, I know I will not shut up about the acting in this episode, but I think this one phone call scene is the best acting I have ever seen out of any actor ever. I am prepared to make that definitive of a statement that this is the best acted scene in anything ever. I think it's one of the best scenes in anything ever. So, So Walt calls Skylar knowing that the police are going to be there listening into the phone call, and they are, and they're like, tells Coach Skylar on what to say, and Walt says, are the police there? And she says no, and he knows that they're there. So he puts on this show basically trying to exonerate Skylar and take all of the blame for everything that happened with the cooking meth and becoming this huge drug pen. He's trying to make it clear in this phone call that Skylar had nothing to do about it, knew nothing about it, and he's playing like the villain. And at first Skylar is she's really upset, saying, where's Holly, give me Holly back. And I think, and you get this, again, brilliant piece of acting from Skylar's part where you see the moment in her eyes, and again, the camera focuses on her while Walt is talking, and you see how she starts to realize what he's doing. Because he usually doesn't sound like this. He's usually not like, you stupid bitch, you told a line. It's not, he is not he said some horrible things to her before, such as the whole I'm the one who knocks speech. So he can be an intimidating prick. But he never really sounded like this. This is a bit unnatural. This is a bit more of a stereotypical egotistical asshole villain, which he's always had a very high ego and pride, but he's never behaved in this way particularly, and so she catches on to what he's doing, and so she plays along a bit. She tries to play the helpless, oh I'm sorry, helpless damsel or whatever, because he knows that's what's going to be better for her, that he takes all the blame for everything. But she does want to know about Hank, because he does mention in his acting that if you don't toe the line, you don't listen to me, you'll end up just like Hank. And again, I say this is the best piece of acting I've ever seen, because the way Bryan, especially when the camera focuses on Bryan Cranston, because you can see how hurt he is by having to put on this play acting show. That it's a calculated performance that he's giving in order to exonerate Skylar, but he's in so much pain having to hear her voice and put on this act, especially when they bring up Hank, and he says, and again, he's trying to be in this performance, he's trying to play the role. When she asks him directly about Hank, he says that you'll never see Hank again. And he says it in a way that is supposed to sound malicious, but we see through the acting that it hurts him, that he's crying and there's tears, that he hates putting on this performance, and that inside he's dying inside. He's in so much pain, and that's why I think this performance is so brilliant. One of the best pieces of acting I've ever seen, to play that duality, and he does it so well and gets it across to the audience so well, exactly what's going on. And again, this moment's even more powerful because when Skylar asks Walt, where's Hank, we see Marie sort of perk up because she wants to know more than anything where her husband is. And mind you, she can only hear Skylar's side of the conversation. She can't hear what Walt is saying. And so when Walt says you'll never see Hank again, she doesn't hear that, but she sees the look on Skylar's face when he says that. And that just the look on Skylar's face is enough for her to realize that Hank's dead. And again, amazing performance as she breaks down crying after seeing when Skylar asked about Hank, and then seeing the look on her face when she heard the response. She knows her husband is dead, and it's such a powerful moment. The anguish that she's in, knowing that Hank is dead. And now again, but Skylar brings it back to Holly because she does want Holly back. And she asks, can you please bring Holly back and come home? And he says that he still has things to do. And this is when it's becoming too much for me. Again, it's an amazing performance because you can tell. And that's why he hangs up suddenly, because this facade, this performance he's putting on is too much. The emotion in this moment that he's feeling is too much, and he can't put on this performance anymore. And you see it start to break down. And that's why he hangs up very abruptly. It's like, I got things to do, and hangs up because he knows that he's going to break, that he's not going to do a good job with this performance anymore because he's too emotional and too caught up in the moment and just crying, and so hangs up. And god damn it, what an amazing scene. I cannot say enough good things about that scene. So when Walt hangs up the phone, he was on a cell phone that he tears apart and rips, one of Saul's disposable phones. And we see that he's standing right across the street from a fire station. And then later we see inside the fire station where they're just, having meal, and they see that one of the fire truck's lights are flashing. So a guy goes to turn it off, and he finds Holly sitting in the seat. So apparently Walt had, as I said, it was clear that he decided that he was going to give her back to Skylar, and he made the phone call specifically across from the fire station because he knew it would be traced, and he knew that the police would come to the location. So obviously he got out before they arrived, but he left Holly at the fire station knowing that the police would arrive there shortly anyway, and so they'd be able to take her back to Skylar. Because he realized that Holly needed to be with her mother, as much as it again pained him to let her go. That he realized it was what was best. And so then we see Walt sitting on the side of the road. This is the same place we saw earlier in the season when Jesse was going to be picked up by the disappearer, and the van pulled up. But of course, in that case, Jesse walked away. But here, Walt doesn't walk away. He gets inside the van. So the disappearer is someone who's been mentioned, I think, all the way back towards the end of season 3. Towards the end of season 3, Saul first brought him up as someone who is very expensive. You have to give him a lot of money, but he is an expert at just making you disappear. That you can run away without a trace, get a new identity, and no one will ever be able to find you again. Which is why he's so expensive. But at the end, he said Saul referred to it as a last resort because there's no coming back from it. Once you choose this option, that's it. Your life's over. You got a new life now. And we've heard this mentioned before, and there were times when it looked like someone was going to use it, like Walt wanted to use him at the end of season 4, but he didn't have the money to pay for him anymore because Skylar had the whole thing with Ted. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Jesse was going to use him in season 6, but then he found out about the Walt poisoning Brock, so decided to go after Walt instead. So he'd been teased a lot, but this is the first time we actually see someone actually utilize him. actually get in the van and drive away. And I love how it does kind of rely on this knowledge, because if you haven't seen the previous episodes, you would probably wouldn't remember the specifics. You probably wouldn't know what the hell this van was and why Walt was getting in it and driving away, or what it signifies. It signifies that Walt's life is over and that there's no coming back from it, and he is about to disappear. And again, I love the style that is filmed, because we see after Walt gets in the van and drives away, we see it drive down the road, and we see a dog just slowly walk across the street as the van is driving away, with no music, just a very sort of eerie feeling of the end. And it's just so picturesque, and it is just it's a subtle but very powerful way to end this very powerful episode. So that's it. That's Ozymandias. Now, I remember the first time I saw this episode, I was at film school, and we had access to the cinema that they had there. So me and a couple of friends who were watching Breaking Bad got together. We watched this for the first time on the big screen. And I remember my friends, they were like screaming at parts of this episode, like when Hank died and when Walt Jr. found out what Walt was doing. They were like, no, and they were, by when the episode ended, when that dog walked across the street and the credits hit, I remember one of my friends just falling on the ground, writhing around, going, what the hell did I just watch? And I think this episode is that powerful. I think I said at the start of my intros for all these a perfect episode videos that I do, that it is a near perfect episode, because I don't want to go as far as to say an episode's entirely perfect, that is completely perfect, because I mean, there's some episodes that I love that I think some of the best ever, like the 13 Reasons Why episode that I reviewed, or the BoJack Horseman episode that I covered, or the Westworld episode that I covered. But there's some scenes that are kind of maybe not that good, maybe the flow doesn't work. There's like in the 13 Reasons Why is a good example. There's a couple of storylines which I think are just kind of okay. Even though I love the main storyline, I think it's a masterpiece. But it's hard for me to call the episode perfect. Well, this episode, I am willing to say it is a perfect episode. It's not near perfect. It is a perfect episode. Like, from start to finish, the way it flows, every single scene. Okay, maybe the starting scene with the flashback was a bit unnecessary, but I don't think that detracts it from me calling it a perfect episode, because that scene didn't suck. It wasn't terrible. It actually did serve a function of juxtaposing what Walt and Jesse's relationship were like then and were like now. I still think it maybe not entirely necessary, but it doesn't disqualify this episode from being a perfect episode, in my opinion. I mean, if any episode's a perfect episode, I think it's this one. And another disclaimer that I say at the start of this series is that these episodes I do are not necessarily my favorite episodes of all time, because there's a couple shows where I actually pick like number 2 or number 3 and not covering number 1. Like BoJack Horseman's a good example, because I covered my second favorite episode of that show, not my first favorite, because the second favorite is just more interesting to analyze. But it's not necessarily my favorite episode of all time. This episode is definitely one of my favorite episodes of any show of all time. In fact, it's probably one of my favorite examples, works of art in the visual storytelling. So movies, shows, what have you. This is one of my favorites of all time. And I do think it would be a really high up, a really strong competition for my favorite episode of any show ever. So I had to include it in my perfect episode series, even though I had talked about this episode before in my coverage of Breaking Bad, but not in so much detail. And I couldn't do a perfect episode series without including this episode, which I do think is in fact a perfect episode. So that is it for my video on Ozymandias. Thanks so much for watching. I still have 4 videos left in my perfect episode series that I will release once a month, so check out my channel for that. Also check out my channel as I cover many other shows, such as Star Trek, all things Star Trek, covering Star Trek Discovery at the moment, and other shows such as Star Wars, The Clone Wars, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.